Ludger's world, a moon of Khyradin, was once a place divided by a sharp class binary. Nobles walked the marble yards of Ludger's executive plazas, enjoyed the rich fruits and sugar stalks of Ludger's cane fields, and spent the bulk of their time in active leisure. For the nobility of Ludger's world and Khyradin, Ludger's world was a paradise. Its thick atmosphere, mild rainforests, and natural beauty made it a popular destination for vacationing nobles looking to relax from the hustle and bustle of Khyradin. Of course, the surface of the world was an opal gem too perfect to be natural, which, indeed, it was not. Ludger's world was a successful proof of concept creation of the House of Stone's massive climate and terrain engineering project, Commencer. Prior to undergoing the process, Ludger's world was a spot-habitable moon named Sanjak. Rich in minerals rare on Khyradin, Sanjak had a healthy indigenous population scattered throughout the habitable craters and the wide network of subterranean environments, seeded during the height of the last argument. The rights to Sanjak were sold by a consortium of the minor indigenous nobility around 2500 U. The consortium families were promptly compensated and moved off-world as the House of Stone seeded Commencer throughout the atmosphere. Told it would not be an invasive process, the millions of ignobles and remaining minor nobles were kept supplied and told to move into their subterranean municipalities, as the terrestrial habitable zones of the world, long fissures, large craters, and ancient glacial valleys, would become the sites of significant catalytic terraforming. Forced into the sealed subterranean passages and habitats under the barren surface and forced to survive the centuries of the Commencer process, the boundaries between noble and ignoble eventually broke down, as the raw pressure of survival inside a closed system forced nobles and ignobles into proximity. Conflict soon followed. The survivors, depleted in number and spirit, came together in mutual aid. Hostilities had significantly reduced the subterranean population. To survive, there had to be peace. Despite constant tight beam contact with Khyradin, the population on Sanjak never received more than automated material aid. Khairati communications were automated as well. The population on Sanjak was, essentially, left alone, buried, but not forgotten. Commencer proved far more effective than the House of Stone intended. It was a smashing success. The already habitable zones flourished as the world grew a thick breathable atmosphere. Within decades of activation, the first recontact teams out from Khyradin settled the freshly cultivated land, marching out across the world's surface as Commencer converted the previously exposed areas of uninhabitable surface to livable plains, oceans, and lush forest. Sanjak, within centuries, was entirely habitable. The commander of the Commencer process, a descendant of the process's architect, Baron Evian Ludger, was gifted the world as his own. He renamed Sanjak after his house, resettled his family, and converted the planet to a lush exclusive resort world. Sanjak became Ludger's world, a destination for the wealthy nobility of Khyradin, and an advertisement for the power of the Commencer terraforming platform. The rechristening of Sanjak to Ludger's world marked the end of the Commencer, decades after initial settlement and the raising of a new generation of facsimile laborers. House Ludger commanded the subterranean municipalities be officially reopened and for reintegration and assimilation to begin, though unofficially. Trade among the ignoble classes, facsimile workforces, and subterranean populations had already led to the growth of a burgeoning black market. This will be important later. The noble classes following the Commencer process were deemed to have intermingled too much with the ignoble classes. Baron Ludger decreed that this breakdown of the social order implied abdication, and voided all claims of nobility with which they petitioned his court. Eager to rejoin the above-ground world, a paradise that was promised, and often spoken of by underground scouts and black market smugglers who had secret ways to the surface, the Sanjak population welcomed the Ludgerans into their home. A system of hard borders and checkpoints was set up, databases were established, and reintegration began. The flow out of the subterranean municipalities was never more than a trickle, a far cry from the flow into the underground world, as House Ludger maintained stiff limits on the number of immigrants out from Sanjak underground. Save for a rarely utilized family reunification scheme, most Sanjak were forced to wait for their numbers to be drawn at the weekly above-ground work visa lottery, and Sanjak Underground quickly became a society oriented around two things: the above-ground lottery and breaking the Ludgeran containment via black market egress points. The smugglers, chasm runners, were folk heroes, able to sneak small groups out of the underground, outfit them with counterfeit papers secured from sympathetic Ludgerans and assimilated Sanjak, and bring back all manner of above-ground goods for trade and sale. They were the focus of popular songs, media, and graffiti across the underground. No secret carried by people stays secret forever though. Ludger's metrics and assimilation spot checks began to detect discrepancies in their population databases, accounting for some error. they determined that the well-known grey to black market must be the source of the extra people. And to correct this, Ludger officials and security forces were sent into Sanjak underground to restore order and secure the border between the underground world and Ludger's world. Widespread unrest followed. House Ludger pointed to this unrest as reason for more security. Security operations probed deeper into Sanjak underground, establishing checkpoints inside the subterranean territory. Smuggler tunnels were rooted out and sealed with concrete. The Ludgerans declared martial law, and extended a peace offering, on their terms. The Sanjak would not be subject to the whims of the lottery's fate, but would be able to work for House Ludger in exchange for assimilation credits, a point-type currency that they could spend for above-ground goods, or save to buy themselves a visa for above-ground work, and eventually, immigration. Accepting this deal and agreeing to stop the initial struggle cowed the Sanjak people for thousands of years. However, it also set the roots for the stronger, more militant, more unified resistance that would eventually spread across the world. The Sanjak, millions strong and contained to the warrens of Sanjak underground, did as they and their ancestors had been forced to do for thousands of years under the Kairati rule. They adapted, dug in, and kept the halls of Sanjak underground alight with hope. Meanwhile, Ludger's world, the mild tropical paradise above the ground, developed into one of the finest destination worlds in the baronies, a common vacation spot for long-term constitutionals. The various resort cities were frequented by Kairati nobles looking for an escape from the bustling metropolises of their home worlds, and members of the noble classes of other worlds looking to retire to a place of peace. They found that escape on Ludger's world, amidst its game parks and fantasy resorts, its orbital cruises and sprawling residency complexes. Throughout the war years of the New Federation, the Interest War, the Dimos event, and the eventual structuring of the modern Karakan trade baronies, the Sanjak people labored for House Ludger. Most remained underground, a spare few managed to buy their freedom to labor above ground at Ludger's many resort territories. Such an arrangement was common among the baronies during the Second Committee's administration. Despite its hands-on approach to galactic expansion, SECOM was not typically concerned with how states managed their own people. With this tacit policy approval, Ludgeran security pushed deeper and deeper into Sanjak life. Year after year, Sanjak Underground's autonomous zones were assimilated into the security territory. Year after year, more Sanjak people were assigned to work the deep mines that kept Ludger's world above, rich with material wealth to sell to Kairatan. Resistance to the Ludgeran encroachment and exploitation of the world above was widespread, but organization was fractal and piecemeal. Records of pamphlets, minutes, and rallies indicate that hundreds of such resistance groups, from the mild to the militant, sprang up with each new announcement of the growth of the security territory. This created a feedback loop that served Ludger's interests. In response to protests against their administration, Ludger's security forces would enact harsh control measures, which would trigger widespread protests, which would prompt a strong Ludgeran response, which would trigger more widespread protests, an advancement of the Ludgeran security border, and so on. The situation was sustainable for a time. Protests were large, but largely reactive, formed in response to provocation, the passage of an odious law, or shaky live media of security personnel beating a non-compliant citizen, and so on. There was no sustained and centralized mass agitation in Sanjak that took proactive steps to counter Ludgeran aggression, yet. When it did come, it surged up from an even deeper source than Sanjak Underground, the mines of Lower Sanjak. The mines of Lower Sanjak were the single most important source of raw material generation for House Ludger. While Ludger's world was known for its relaxing beaches, tropical climes, mild weather, and entertainment, the backbone of its industry, and mana generation, were the deep core mines of Lower Sanjak. Before Ludger's world was Ludger's world, Sanjak was a resource vein for Kairatan. While a significant portion of the population lived the habitable zones above ground and in the vast subterranean network of Sanjak Underground, the bulk of the work of mining took place in the deeper levels of the moon's crust. This was Lower Sanjak, a raw hive of mining tunnels and industry that circled the world, with a working population of millions that rotated between the municipalities of Sanjak Underground and the mines. Worried about the further development of an organized resistance already evident in Sanjak, House Ludger began importing flash facsimile workers to the underground and assigning them to existing parties. Promised rewards along a different shorter track than the indigenous Sanjak population, facsimile workers were motivated by Ludgeran officials to report individuals that worked to foment dissent and organize resistance. Their overt role as approved observers and privileged persons by Ludgeran security ensured that Sanjak laborers would never share plans with or attempt to organize the facsimile workers into their resistance. This relationship, of exploited peoples pitted against each other, of malicious observation used as a management tool to ensure resource extraction, of material rewards used as temporary relief from longer suffering, continued for centuries. Alleviation would eventually come at the hands of an indigenous movement inspired by a pair of mythologized revolutions, the Second Committee's defeat by the Third, and the Republican conversion of the House of Water. During the fall of the Second Committee and the rise of the Third, anthro-chauvinist SECOM elements present in Karakan space even fought small-scale engagements against revolutionary ThirdCom agitators and their baronic supporters across Karakis. On Ludger's world, news of the Second Committee's fall was greeted with celebration. The baronies never had a congenial relationship with Union, and to hear that its ruling body had fallen to violence and Cradle was in open revolt was less an ideological victory than it was simply a point to be gloated. Whatever committee would come next would be treated much the same by the interplanetary nobility of the baronies, but for the duration of the crisis, they could celebrate the poor fortune of their political rivals. Ludger's world, then, was a paradise of loose talk for revolutionary heirs, and sympathetic above-ground laborers, those born to service in the crafted paradise, and those who had bought their freedom to work above ground, gathered as much information as they could. No quarantine of people is perfect, and despite the hard border between Ludger's world and Sanjak Underground, news of ThirdCom's apparently successful revolution filtered to the people of Sanjak Underground and lower. An indigenous form of ThirdCom's anti-chauvinist ideology began to grow among the laborers, bedding a ripe kindling awaiting a spark. With clandestine support from the House of Water, the long-dormant culture of pamphleteering and mine-floor organizing began anew. The facsimile population, long an ally of Ludgeran security, learned of ThirdCom's revolutionary prohibitions against facsimile and flash clone exploitation. Slowly, the younger generations began to drift from their parents' loyalist dogma. The 3 bars, a rough interpretation of ThirdCom's simple flag, began to appear, painted and papered onto the mineshaft walls of Lower and in the alleys of Sanjak Underground. House Ludger, in response, declared more material rewards and above-ground passes for those who reported anti-baronic, pro-union, or Republican behavior. In a now famous statement by the then Baron Ludger following a particularly active protest, the population of Sanjak Underground, both the Sanjak people and their facsimiles, was decried as a mass of lazy ungratefuls. The label took, but not in the way that House Ludger intended. The 3 bars of union was replaced with sign, the Sanjak word for bad guest, Maldank, translated into common, as ungrateful. Hello there, if you like this video, please subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell button. If you really want to support my channel, you could visit my Patreon page, or buy me some coffee, links in the description. Anyway, have a nice day.